The best brand strategy is to zoom all the way out to the operating system level and just be that for your community and let your contributors fill in the color. Brand as a coloring book.
Hello friends, Jess here from Seed Club. Welcome to Season 3 of Building at the Edges. We host conversations with the top innovators, thinkers, and builders at the intersection of crypto and community. I'm very excited to bring this conversation with Seed Club's very own Peace Node. Peace Node is our creative director at Seed Club. He's the one who makes us look so good on the internet. No easy task, given the multitudes of media and demands that exist in a DAO like Seed Club. He's also behind many of the visuals in the Songcamp ecosystem. I wanted to have this conversation with Peace Node for two reasons. One, I think he's a fascinating human being. I think he's already proven himself to be one of the defining designers in this pocket of Web3, and I think he's just getting started. So you've probably heard of him if you're listening to this podcast, but I'm sure many more people will hear of him in the future. So I wanted to have a chance for us all to get to meet him a little bit more, understand his creative process, where he's coming from, and the intentions that he's bringing to his work. But I think there's this other conversation, which is how do we actually go build a brand for a DAO or with a DAO or as a DAO? How do we chart a visual direction when charting a direction of any sort can be complicated? What are the things that we need to build from a process perspective or from a conceptual perspective that allow for many people to participate in the building of a brand and a visual brand? So we spend the first part of this conversation talking about Peace's inspiration and his intentions and how he gets to creating the work. And then we spend a bunch of time talking about the things he's created at Seed Club to try to understand his process and thinking and where we get it right, maybe some of the lessons that come along with it as well. Through it all, we're sort of pulling at this thread of who is Peace Node and how do we actually build a meaningful brand in Web3 as a DAO. Peace Node is just a fascinating individual. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. So let's get into it. Peace Node, welcome to the pod.
Yo, thanks for having me.
So really excited to get to chat with you because I think most people are very familiar with your work, even if they're unaware that they're familiar with your work. But I'm assuming that many people don't really know much about you. And I think one of the pleasures I've had over the last year, we've been working together for a year, close to it, is just seeing like the depth and thoughtfulness and sort of layers that not only exist on the artwork that you create, but also in the process and thinking behind it. So today what we could do is dive into a little bit about you, demystify the pseudonymous Peace Node. And then you have a lot of experience at sort of the collaboration, the creation, the thinking through what brand is in a DAO and how to actually execute on that. Because I think those are two different but equally challenging things to move forward. First, though, I think people are like, who the hell is Peace Node? So like peel back a couple layers here. Who are you?
For sure. Yeah. So I use the name Peace Node. I'm a Twitter account. I was formerly an Instagram account where I used different names. And I'm a poster maker and product designer from the music industry where I was doing LPs and cassettes, physical releases for smaller labels, independent labels, concert posters, and merchandising for bands. I got into DAOs around 2020. Yeah, couldn't look away from crypto Twitter, got into the whole NFT thing, and then was introed really into the DAO realm through Songcamp. A friend of mine, Samsonite, invited me in there, and yeah, I've been sucked down the whirlwind since.
I think this like idea of poster making being the way you describe yourself, and at least in the work that you used to do. And when people hear that that's the core medium that you're building in, there's a pretty clear translation to the visual representation or your style that exists in the work that you're doing right now. I'm curious, like, what was that evolution like? Do you feel like you're doing very different work today, or is this just like a more subtle evolution?
It's more different than I would like to think that it is. Yeah, I got into poster making just from coordinating events and I had a lot of fun sourcing like rare paper types and seeing like basically whatever I could jam through the Kinko's printers, and had a lot of fun printing and reprinting. I found out you can print single colors on Xerox machines. And so it's pretty fun to do an all green layer and do your all blue layer, et cetera, and layer those things up. So I got really confident and comfortable in that medium with paper, and definitely was like, okay, why don't websites look like this. You could make anything into a website. And then, yeah, now probably after a year of playing around in product design, it's like super clear why the mediums are really very different. And they, at least for me, occupy kind of a different place in my mind. Both are organizing information, but yeah, I think because of the way a lot of conventions that people use to make websites, it actually is super important to build to that.
So I'm curious, how would you describe your style? Is there sort of like I think that the fun and amazing thing with being a creative pursuit is that there's just like unlimited possibilities. And yet to be able to make progress on something like certain frameworks or mental models or directions are sort of required. So I'm curious how you describe your style and maybe what focus that brings for you.
I hadn't really considered what I would call my style. I think I would say that I'm a graphic designer and poster maker as a style, which feels like a cop-out answer now that I'm explaining it. Because what I really try to do is just stick to classics and stick to things that work. I look a lot through design throughout history, and I just really aim to copy that as well as I can so that when I fail, it just turns out like originality.
I love that. I mean, I think what's interesting to me is, as somebody who gets to collaborate with you, is just seeing like at least my impression of it is you take something that I feel is like a good starting point, and then you kind of like dive deep into it, almost like peeling back a bunch of layers. I feel like your starting point on something is, I would say the word deeper, but maybe it's just lower down the stack, and you sort of are unpacking the starting point and then rebuilding from there. Is that a fair sort of way to describe your work?
I guess for me, a lot of what I'm doing is I'm preparing images with information that communicate a call to action or are like asking for attention in a certain way. And in order to even be able to make a graphic or a website or anything that actually communicates what you need it to, it kind of just requires really an understanding what that need is. I mean, I don't want to say deeper, but I feel really lucky because I sit in between the media and the product team on Seed Club. So I'm just, communicating through both teams and maybe see like some perspectives that just get lost in the fold.
I feel like even beyond the information though, like where do you tap into for inspiration? Because there's been a few major sort of projects where I've seen you do this, both from Club Goods, which was the first, not a merch drop from C Club, but then, through some of the deeper brand building stuff. Like there seems to be these themes that you catch onto or narratives or inspirations. My takeaway from all of our conversations is like, damn, I didn't see the world in as many different hues, I guess, as you have. And yeah, so maybe the question is like, where does that inspiration come from, or where do you turn to for that inspiration?
Totally. I don't know. I shouldn't be afraid to answer this. I'm going to give away all my secrets here, but I try to be like pretty direct. Like a lot of the inspiration that I take will be from PC Mag or like old stereo magazines. So I look at basically traditionally, quote unquote, traditionally, these things weren't traditional when they were coming out. They were like people who made whole careers about being software designers, et cetera, or designers for the software packaging. So I look at a lot of that because I find those stories really inspiring. I look at a lot of new age design material. Yeah, I look at, for type, I look at ITC and I look at Letraset, and I just try to find the most like normal, quote unquote, standard stuff, because for me, it's like, I love all the new flashy stuff, but every time I use it, it has like a 6-month shelf life before I'm like, oh God, why did I put this out there? So I just try to, go from the archives. With Club Goods, I was looking a lot at Whole Earth catalog because within Whole Earth, that's like a whole thread to pull on in and of itself, because it's all about access to tools, which has a lot of the shared narrative that we have with Web3 and the democratization of the internet.
I think this idea of timelessness in technology, I think is really interesting, because, at the root, what we're talking about here is building. The crazy thing for me is that these DAOs, so if you think about something like Nouns DAO, it's going to exist forever in some form, right? Maybe people will stop buying them. Maybe it'll sort of, the treasury will dwindle to close to zero, but it's going to be, as long as Ethereum's around, it's going to exist. And I think same thing with like the NFT projects that I'm most excited about. I'm a big Art Blocks fan. And the thing that really, stood out for me. What makes those types of tokens different than many of the others is just like the fact that they're on chain and that these things are going to exist forever. And I think, in the Web 2 world, there is this sort of ephemerality that exists, especially in a lot of I think as you're pointing to, like the new design that is coming out from that. And so there's a sense of like refreshing and new and a short shelf life. And yet in this sort of base medium that we're playing with here, there is this idea of, everlasting. So I feel like there's maybe an intentional or unintentional match there between the search for that sort of, long-lasting, traditional thing that will stand the test of time in the way that, I don't know, Craigslist stands the test of time.
It's no coincidence, but I actually think the connection just comes from like my own personal interest. So it's like, yeah, definitely. There was a time when, I might answer the phone like, hey, this is Peace Node from Craigslist. I'm like calling to take a look at your truck. And, I have like a huge interest in catalog numbers and archiving and all that stuff. And that kind of permanence and like the provenance of information on chain is what attracts me to this space. So it is partly in what I'm responding to, but also it very much just is like my goal anytime I'm making a design wherever it is. And I'm very much here because of that permanence and the library of culture that we're creating that we can all access. It's really amazing.
So I'm curious, like, how long have we actually worked together, Peace?
I think probably spring of 21. Is that like too late? That's probably about right.
I definitely remember sitting there in Portugal last year talking about sort of the evolution of our working arrangement. And so I think we'd been doing stuff for a while before then. What is time but just perpetual minting of blocks? But I guess, so, for what I saw in the work that you're doing early on was just this, like, your personal style really just being incredibly compelling. And that even though the things that you were putting out onto the internet for the various projects you were working on were very different, there was sort of this consistency through it. And I think in the early days at C Club, you were really leaning into that. And so for me, it was like, oh, Peace Node's aesthetic being C Club's aesthetic just seemed like the most amazing possibility in my mind. But what's sort of inherent in that is this interesting challenge, right? Where you are bringing yourself, your creativity, your art, your personal being, to use that to define the visual language and brand of an organization. On some level, that's just like fucking amazing. And then on the other level, I feel like as a creator, as an artist, there might be some, I don't know, was there a challenge in doing that? I'm curious how you sort of balance this sort of personal design aesthetic with now holding responsibility for building, hopefully, this like, everlasting brand.
Yeah, I think the problem with building a brand out of like an individual style is that it just doesn't really scale beyond that individual. And when you're branding a DAO, you need to be building frameworks that do. And so that's been the large goal really of my work in product, is to kind of like step outside of my normal voice and start to build like operational containers for products that allow me to transmit my style right now, but also in the future allow other people to transmit that style. I think like with anything, to really get that consistency, it actually just does also come down to finding people who have the same work styles. The truth about my art is that I come from like a whole school of thinkers who are designing posters and designing graphics in a really, really similar way. And there's a lot of people who probably could step in and do what I'm doing, but a lot of those people just aren't onboarded into Web3. And when they hear about it, they're kind of like, I'm just going to keep posting my stuff to Tumblr or whatever they're doing, working out of their email, etc. That really is a part of my ongoing thesis. That's a work in progress about what brand is in Web3. And I actually think that it's larger than a lot of the style kits that brand has been reduced to on, YouTube and TikTok how-tos.
Well, what's different between, like, what's missing from like the traditional brand style guide based sort of approach?
Yeah, I think that the biggest difference is that in Web 2, you can have a web page, right? So it's really easy to like put in all your patterns, put in all your stock images and do all this like super fun stuff. You still see that on like startup websites, and that's all well and great. But the difference is that in Web3, you're not just building web pages, you're building web products. And so you're building these products which your community is affecting. Information is changing them all the time, on them all the time. And I just think that the best brand strategy is to zoom all the way out to the operating system level and just be that for your community and let your contributors fill in the color. Brand as a coloring book.
I think what's interesting is there's a shift in work mode here that I think you're getting at. Yeah, I love that idea. It's a coloring book. So there's lines, but there are many pages, and then there's a ton of possibilities. And really like the desired outcome and for these Web3 brands or subcultures is the idea that they get to be remixed and evolved. And so it does feel like having sort of a stodgy specific brand guideline set really is maybe only at worst is a hindrance there, but I guess when applied well becomes sort of the basis point for remixing, right? We need some level of structure to be able to keep things relevant or moving in a similar direction and consistent, but also it would sort of be a failure for it to just be a repurposing of the same X number of pieces, right? So, but then I guess that the challenge from that becomes like, okay, well, as you are building and operating across multiple teams, like the complexity starts to build up. And I know that, a big part of our work over the last little while has been sort of navigating those challenges, like how to be an effective steward of brand in an organization that has so many moving pieces and parts. And in many cases, not one person who's just making the final decision on things. I'm curious just about how have you sort of approached bringing in process or sanity to your work, given the multiple operational complexities that just naturally exist in DAOs like C Club?
Yeah. Well, what I do is actually I just have some templates built. I try to keep it super easy on myself so that I have a basis to at least like I'm not starting from the 0 point. And from there, it's just about showing work early to make sure that everything is copacetic. We're like 1, hitting the right tone, 2, getting the right copy in there and the information is correct. But also a lot of times, like through these different working groups, right? Like a post or a graphic might represent a different working group. And I like making graphics in service to other people. Yeah, I started making posters to capture attention and make shows happen so we could pay bands. The line of thought like carries through all the way. Like I make graphics in DAOs for the best possible outcome of whatever that graphic need is. It feels important to me just to get input early and often from fellow contributors.
Yeah, I think that point of like the value that is trying to be driven towards is a place where I think we've had a number of really interesting conversations. And, the thing that I think keeps coming up for me as, it's really easy to look at DAOs as like these machines and there's a billion moving parts. But when you get right down to it, it is working arrangements between multiple people. And there's sort of this evolution of collaboration that sort of happens there. And one of the things I think I've seen really be an unlock for our working relationship is just part of it is showing work early, but there's even a piece before that, which is just getting really clear on what this is supposed to do. Have you found that being a useful unlock, or am I just talking about my own personal experience here?
No, I mean it's super useful. Like there are times, when it's nice if someone can be like, hey, this needs to have these 3 things on there. But I think maybe just from, being a designer, there's like a little bit of extra insight that I feel like I have developed from learning more of just like X, Y, and Z. And there's actually, there's a trick to communicating those 3 things. And sometimes there's even more information than that. And so it is just important to know like what the goal is so that the best information can be surfaced.
Yeah, there's just like this consistent push to more clarity. And I mean, I use the word structure quite a bit, but I would say like, I remember early in some of our collaborations, I think frustrations existed probably across everybody collaborating. And really what it came down to is sort of a lack of clarity on some basic pieces. Like this idea of being able to communicate vision and then execute on that vision is just like, it's incredibly complex. There's, our English language, even when we're trying to be very purposeful and specific with it, leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And so I think like if I zoom out and think about even our creative process as an organization over the last while, the biggest shift I've seen is just like this relentless pursuit to try to get more clear early and to spend more time up front in ways that maybe don't feel like they're the most efficient way at building that context, but are ultimately like required. And I don't think there is like a direct efficient path to it. Like understanding a shared context is so important, and no amount of docs really capture the nuance there. So I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's super true. It's actually really crazy what a trip language can be, especially in the creative world, because you can talk it all out until the cows come home. But until there's like ink on the paper, you kind of have no idea if two people are talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I resemble that comment.
Yeah. One huge workflow that I really love. Are you ready for my plug? It's a joke that I'm an angel investor with Figma, and unfortunately I'm not, but those collaborative docs are amazing. And it's so awesome to even be with people who don't have design skills and see them because, it's like a human trait to organize things, I think. And it's just great to see how people put information directly into Figma. And it's one of my favorite ways to get info because I'm like, okay, great. This is everything we need. We're looking at it together at the same time in the file. We can talk about it. And it just yeah, we all know. We all love Figma.
I mean, I do. And I think like every single time we encounter one of these challenges where there's like how to sort of explore the realm of possibilities, or maybe coming up with a challenge where you go, okay, well, I have my own point of view here, but I know there's just so much outside of my own worldview here that really should inform this. A fig jam or sort of an existing design approach that then allows for that exploration to happen is just, I mean, it's a crazy superpower, and it's one that I think is even more present in these types of organizations. Where I think about the core unlock of C Club, and I think we're still working our way towards this. Is like what happens when you have 100 incredible DAOs that are a part of this network who have 100 incredible people who are working with those DAOs. How might we sort of access that collective intelligence, both for very specific things like how do we map the ecosystem or tools, et cetera, but then also into thinking how we actually sort of push messaging and visuals and brand forward. It's both chaotic, but also like at that level, there's sort of this like shared context that allows that hive mind to be so much more effective than I think just the mass chaos that can exist just on the broad internet.
Absolutely. Well, and what's really interesting, it took me, I don't know how long before being in the DAO world. I think there is this kind of like mystification to it. There's this like glaze that over my eyes that happened where I was like interacting with a brand new thing. And it was a big unlock to realize, actually I can bring a lot of the structure that I learned from freelancing into this realm. I think for a minute it was kind of like, let's go wild style in the chat room, right? We're all throwing down and making this brand new thing. But especially in the last 6 months, just really bringing back in some of my processes have been so, so helpful. And I think they help other people too, as far as like identifying an objective, making a mood board, doing rough sketches, just like really traditional, normal structure type stuff that a lot of freelancers are familiar with. Yeah, I don't know if a lot of people bring them to the DAO space. I didn't until, we started craving it, basically.
Yeah, I feel like there's this mass divergent, convergent sort of process that happens, and that we're all going through, right? Where, the impulse and excitement for so many people joining DAOs was this craving for something new. And I think there was this search for doing things new ways, and some of those things last and are worthwhile and are useful. And then others are big disruptions and sort of get in the way of actually making progress. And so I don't think there's like a linear path to figuring out which is which unless you sort of go out and explore. And so I think like that divergence and of exploring new possibilities, and then a convergence on the mix of the new and the old to actually sort of be able to move forward in new ways is probably the way I describe operations in DAOs across the board. I think we definitely felt that at all levels of our organization, as far as, both wanting to push new edges and also feeling the need to make progress and build momentum and do all the things that require human beings to come together and make stuff. And guess what? There's like hundreds of years of history on how to go do that well that we probably would do well to take more direction from. Though I understand the reticence to do that. I think that the likelihood of really being able to build something everlasting here, through throwing out all of the old is just very unlikely.
Totally agree. And of all the new things, I will say, unrelated to any of that organizational stuff, the absolute best thing in the new process is sending images through the chat. It's my favorite thing in the world. I can't believe that Discord almost maybe no compression at all, and then they give you a little hosted link. It's my favorite new world way to collaborate. Raw files right in the chat. It's awesome.
One of those files that you shared a while back is this DAOish type of guy meme. And, I think we've been fascinated generally. I'm going to assume that you're also fascinated with Toby's piece, After Lifestyle, which really, I think, put really clear language to something that many folks building in the DAOs and even the broader NFT space have been, I think, poking at, which is this idea of subcultures and ownership and sort of the combination of those two. And I think, when I zoom out and think about the work that we're embarking on here is really trying to represent this new cultural movement that is, the building and launching and creating of these new types of organizations, to represent that in images. And so if I would sort of think about, like, there's one level where Peace Note is the holder of the creative vision and building the brand for C Club, but there's sort of that next level of, like, how are we contributing to the broader cultural movement that is these internet native organizations or DAOs. So I'm curious, maybe just first about the DAOish type of guy, what the inspiration was there and what we were trying to get at. And then would love to hear your comments on that sort of broader cultural empowerment.
Yeah, I mean, with that, I really just wanted to find a funny way for everyone to identify. It's a lot of the textbooks that everyone's reading and the Shure microphones that all the podcasters love to use. And the idea is, this is how automatic I am. I'm on automatic all the time. I didn't have a lot of deep thought when I was making it, other than I wanted to capture someone who's interested in crypto and has optimized their desk for collaboration. Is really what it was about. Is like, are you comfortable to be at the station and talk about these ideas that we're on? That's the DAOish type of guy.
I identify so much with the station. I feel like when I'm out of my office and I'm on the road or something like that, I feel very much like I'm not plugged into the matrix or the metaverse. I mean, when I'm sitting here, I feel like I'm sitting at this console that is the operations room, which is made up of, like, my Discord and Telegram and my calendar. So the DAOish types of guy meme is like, there's a Shure mic, there's announce glasses, there's a mechanical keyboard, there's impact networks and network state, and Vitalik's recent book, and then there's coffee and AirPods and your Ledger Nano. And yeah, I very much feel like I'm part of this sort of, like, operations center that's mostly message driven. And it feels so weird to me in many ways when I'm not plugged into it. Like, I truly feel like we work in the metaverse, even though it's not crypto voxels or whatever, but this metaverse is right now just sort of instantiated in these various panes that live on my desktop right now. And that I get to interact with through these peripherals that are plugged into this beautiful Mac device.
Etherscan is the real metaverse here. That's for sure.
So I'm curious about this sort of broader, this idea of cultural movements and sort of how a brand, especially from the visual perspective, plays into that. Like, are you being thoughtful or is that sort of like the contributing to a broader cultural landscape, something that you're, a lens that you look through when you're creating here at C Club, or am I just trying to put way too much meaning on the awesome work you're doing?
Well, I think that those things happen without too much intention, to be honest. I mean, I think that it requires a lot of individuals to be well-intentioned. Because I think that, like, brand is a really interesting word, and it's interesting because when we talk about it in this context, we talk about, like, these style kits. We think of, like, a logo, a font, the colors that you use, the type of images that you use, the type of words that you say. But brand isn't really that. It's how people feel when they interact with you. It's what they take away from it. And yeah, a lot of why I like the idea of shedding some of the basics that I was talking about earlier is because I don't think that branding should be the way you would, like, brand cattle. Like, you don't want to take a steaming hot piece of iron and, like, burn it on the rear end of who you're interacting with so that they're left with this mark. It's like, what brand should be is this feeling that you can interact with this culture, this feeling that you have a voice in it and that you're a part of it. And do I think that what I'm doing is shaping that in a, like, huge way? Like, probably not, but I do try to be thoughtful about my contributions and, make things that capture attention for sure, but not without instilling FOMO or, like, all these, like, negative side effects that can come from the megaphone.
I love that. A long-term desire that we shared was to revamp the C Club website and to make it feel more aligned with where the organization is and definitely, like, the other things we're putting out onto the internet. So, I think the cclub.xyz site, this idea of the mullet strategy, I think is what we called it internally. It has this sort of beautiful Web 1.0 feel. I'm curious about the approach there and what was our process to getting there?
So with the C Club website, what I was looking at was early software boot disks and just a ton of old OS, not only like screenshots, but also inspo, because there's like a pretty, I mean, we've all seen a million websites where people are like harkening back to this era, and there's a lot of different fun and creative ways that you can do it. But I was really just, on a, to be honest, maybe just like looking for my own satisfaction. I wanted to like get as close to the real thing as possible. That's my motto, that for sure, like as close to the real thing as possible. Looking for the real thing, the real tomato. And so, yeah, I just spent a lot of time looking at dialog boxes and dialing bevels, probably like way more than I needed to. But yeah, I really wanted it to feel good. And then once I had a design that I was super stoked on, I was like looking at it and I was like, man, it really is driving me crazy how crispy these lines are. Because what I really like in all those things is seeing the screenshots that are all like crunched up by time, or like, I don't know where these images come from or how we still have them on the internet. It's pretty amazing. But I like what time has done to them. And so what I did was I took a Times New Roman font and then I beat it up on Photoshop and brought it into Illustrator and traced all the letters and set up a working type so that I could pass off a web font to Hurls and we could have that kind of crunchy feel to the website. It was a lot of fun. And we called the type terminal display, even though it's just a totally destroyed Times New Roman.
Okay, I didn't realize that you created a whole new font for this. I remember looking at this early on and be like, why is it so fucking pixelated on everything? And I'm like, God, that piece, we gotta not do this. And I think you push back really hard on that in your lovely indirect way, which is like, yeah, cool. I hear that feedback, and also I'm not going to change it because this is the way that it should look. And I think it turned out great because of that. Actually, my experience of giving feedback on this website was like, it was largely accepted, and then in a couple of core ways, you're like, yeah, no, fucking, we're going to keep this the way that I like it. And the more I look at it, the more I'm like, I'm very glad that you did that. These small little details make such a difference in ways that I think are easy to overlook if you're just thinking about it from a practical standpoint, which I'm oft to do.
There's nothing wrong with practicality. Yeah. And always appreciate the back and forth, appreciate the leeway to express myself, for sure.
Well, I mean, I think that's honestly like I think just that the simplest strategy that we've had around brand here is just like, I guess it's a strategy in C Club generally. It's like, find amazing people who share similar values and direction and support and add feedback, but then ultimately ensure that agency lives with the people that are best suited to making these decisions. And so I think I don't know if that's always purposeful, but I think I'm always surprised when that is the thing that comes through. And I think back to your earlier point about sort of, brand being this thing that I love the visceralness of just like the hot iron on somebody's butt versus this sort of emergent co-creation type of thing. And I think it's one of those things that you can only be so purposeful about. Like there's like an intention that needs to be set there rather than a strategy or structure. And I see that definitely in the work that you do for C Club, but also, across our organization. It's just kind of a wild place to be building in because it is an indirect path, but yeah, it's this balance between directness and sort of like the fun, powerful emergence that kind of happens. And it's this interesting dance.
It's going to be interesting to see it play out. I think particularly around organizations like Nouns, where the ownership is so overt. I really wonder. And, they're doing the expansion packs. I'm like, are Nouns going to look like Nouns in 10 years? Like, what are they going to be? What could they possibly be? Maybe they will. Maybe it is just that lasting. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a brilliance in how they got the noggles so right. And my guess is that never changes. But I think you're right. I think there's a high likelihood that a lot of other things change. It's kind of the interesting thing about Nouns, right? It's both this like permanence and on-chain, and yet there's this sort of broad upgradability or expansion that can happen within it. And yet all those decisions are ultimately live with token holders who get to cast their vote. It's probably one of the most interesting sort of headless brand experiments out there.
Besides Bitcoin.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's some who would argue that those are the only two true DAOs, right? It's Bitcoin and it's Nouns. I don't know if I agree with that, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I actually just say that because what I think about is interesting is that Bitcoin has like the ugliest logo of all time, and yet people are so willing to proliferate it. And
yeah, the tattoos, man. The tattoo. Like people are literally branding themselves with it.
super crazy.
You know, that was just like a forum post. I saw a screenshot of this forum post. It was just like somebody like, here's a logo I did and here's the files. And, you know, it just came out of one of those 2008, 2009 forum posts and truly has become, I mean, it's like probably one of the most well-known brands in the world right now.
100%.
All right. I have a couple of questions that our dear friend Samsonite has posed here to sort of close us out. If you had to pick 3 typefaces to work with at C Club for the next 3 years, what would they be?
Super easy. It would be ITC Lou Ballin, ITC Avant Garde, Gothic, and then one more family, ITC Garamond. Favorite weight, light condensed, for sure, all the way.
I love this because the only reason I know those font faces is because I've had to struggle to download them and use them in Figma on my machine as I'm trying to update presentations so I don't have to get you to do them. I'm curious what your 2 favorite designs that you've made in Web3 are and why. Who are your favorite children? Peace note.
I think probably my first favorite would be Lunar Veil, which was a song that was released on Catalog Works, and that was one of the first pieces of artwork that I did that became an NFT. Yeah, and then I think, oh man, how am I supposed to choose this? I think I am most proud of the upcoming C Club Press website that's going to be coming out. I'm really excited about the way that we'll be able to play host to the podcast and our editorial, and operate kind of as a gallery as well for all the podcast work that we've done. Super proud of all that, but I'll just do a cop out and choose the whole product.
That's fair. Some of the things that are coming out of our media team, I think over the next little while are going to be really exciting. I looked at some of the files for the motion graphics that are being built right now, and it just brought me immense joy to see how those are going to come out into the world. So I guess maybe now I'm sharing my favorite stuff. I think the latest work you did for Building at the Edges, you came out of the gate with something that was very baked, and there actually wasn't a whole lot of collaboration, at least from my end, on what that was. But you hit the mark the first time. I think it's just this clear and compelling and expandable sort of visual language that exists for the podcast. I think is just going to carry us. It's the type of thing where I could just see it being that forever and working. So I love that.
I'm excited to see, how we can keep building it out. I mean, that, I will say, like, came with collaboration from Tina and Samsonite. So shout out to them.
I figured there was a lot of work before I got to see it, but nonetheless. Okay, well, I'm curious as you sort of set your sights forward. You've had an immense impact on C Club ecosystem thus far. But I'm curious, what are you sort of most exciting to push towards in the coming months and years? Where do you see your role or the type of work that we're doing at C Club going?
Well, I really enjoyed Songcamp's Project Chaos because I not only got to contribute graphics to that, but I got to sit on there as a creative director and steward that whole project along. And I really would like to see more projects like that are dealing with distribution and ownership and media. And I mean, the way that we did that was like by releasing an album, but I think that there's, you could release anything through that mechanism. And I really am excited to, explore doing more NFT collections, less one-off art, although, I love doing that stuff, but I'm interested in making works that reach a lot of people. And also you mentioned the video kit, which is a collaboration between myself and Bobby Pastel, who uses the name Zone Catalog on IG and also contributes to Pool Suite. If you subscribe to the Palm Report, you've definitely seen his work. And so I would love to, step into an art direction, creative direction role and start working with more designers to build more expansive worlds for people to come in and own and play around in.
Yeah, I think like the Peace Node collabs is something I'm very excited about as well. And I think we'll see like the first result of that through this collaboration with Bobby. I think as I was sharing before we started recording here, I was sitting down with a bunch of folks in Denver earlier this year. And the conversation around the table was just about how prolific your work is. It's sort of being a defining style within at least a segment of Web3. And so I'll just repeat that here again, because I think it's important that I think it can be very easy to sort of live in our own computers, in our own world, but to to sort of sit at a big table with a number of people who are all just talking about the incredible work you've been doing. I know it brought joy to my heart, and I hope it does to yours as well. And then also to sort of think about, like I think it's also crazy to think that one person is going to be a defining designer or the style. One style will be the defining style of Web3 or even the small segment of Web3 that we play in. I think it's very likely that it's going to be this sort of interaction between just the creative brilliance that exists in this space and sort of the ecosystem that evolves from that. So I do like this idea of being more purposeful in ensuring that type of collaboration happens.
Well, it's super, super humbling to hear all that. I'm thankful. Yeah, I'm just thankful to, be able to contribute where I can, because there's a lot of amazing work that's being done.
Yeah, it's a builder's market pieced out. I don't know. We've reframed bear market to builder's market because
there we go.
Well, I think in our worlds, there's been no shortage of building that has been done, needs to be done, and is yet to be done, which I guess are the same thing. But yeah, it's just I very much appreciated the impact you've had on C Club. I think it's really easy to, in a traditional world, I think, to sort of devalue the power of design and the impact that has on how people feel and how people see a brand or an organization. And I think you just brought a level of professionalism and vibes to C Club that has had an incredibly tangible impact on it. And at the same time, I feel like we and you are really just getting started here. So yeah, do you ever do this? I mean, I do this often where I sort of sit back and think about like, what does this look like in 5 years and in 10 years? And it's both a very hazy thing, but it brings my heart an immense amount of joy to think about the possibilities. We've come so far and yet have so far to go. And I think it's really easy to underestimate the amount of change and impact that can happen over, the 5 and 10 year time horizon that we very much have our eyes set on here at C Club. So I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Me as well. Yeah. I mean, well, the best part is that we get to kick it all off with our Jordan year, 2023.
Is that what we're calling next year? Is this the Jordan year?
It's the Jordan year for sure. It's 21st century Jordan year, and it's gonna allow us to blast off on this 5 to 10 year vision journey, like in an immense way. I'm really excited. Like the past 6 months we've had our heads down working on so many different projects, and we're about to see a lot of them go live. And super, super excited. Because I need, what do I feel like? I definitely envision in the next, 5 years, but I need some walls to bump into. And so it'll be really great to get some of this work out into the world so people can bump into it and get some feedback, be able to see where I'm going a little better.
I love that. Well, Peace, thank you for sharing time with me and our listeners today. Where can people find you on the internet?
I am at peace_node on Twitter. And you can write me there.
Love it. Thanks, boss.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jess. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hello, friends. Steph here, Media Team Steward at C Club. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review Building at the Edges. This helps other Web3 builders discover these valuable insights. And tell us what you think on Twitter. Tag us at @CClubHQ. Thanks for listening. See you on the internet.